All right, let's jump right into this explainer and tackle something pretty much everyone can relate to. We're talking about that deeply stressful, universally understood household crisis. What really happens when a child completely bombs their entrance exams? I mean, it's a moment of absolute panic and disappointment, right? But the source material we're looking at today offers a radically different perspective on why this happens and what it actually means. We're going to unpack this really fascinating philosophy that shifts the entire paradigm of academic success and failure.
So before we immediately point fingers at the student who just brought home those terrible grades, the source material asks us a pretty provocative question. What if this failure is actually a symptom of a much larger breakdown in their environment? You know, it's so incredibly easy to just look at the kid and demand more effort, but this philosophy challenges us to look elsewhere.
We've got a really interesting roadmap ahead for this explainer. First, we'll ask, exam failure, whose fault is it? Second, we'll dive into nature's 30-30-40 rule. Third, we'll look at the true role of educated parents. And finally, we'll wrap up with the power of environment.
Okay, starting with Section 1, Exam Failure, Whose Fault? Moving beyond blame and punishment. When a kid's scores absolutely plummet, the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of parents is to scold, interrogate, or just aggressively push for more tutoring. But our source argues that this is entirely the wrong approach.
According to the text, a child's academic performance is directly tied to the foundational environment that parents provide. And we aren't just talking about physical comforts here. In this view, bad grades simply mean those deeper, necessary conditions weren't met, so the failure actually acts as a mirror. It reflects the parent's level of preparation and the environment they've cultivated, rather than just the kid's lack of effort.
Moving right along to Section 2, Nature's 30-30-40 rule, the shared burden of success. This brings us to a brilliantly structured concept from our source that completely flips how we view responsibility. This source proposes this strict mathematical breakdown of the burden. It calls it a law of nature. Basically, a child is never 100% at fault. They only carry 40% of the burden. The parents in society, they each hold a mandatory 30%. If the parents drop the ball and don't fulfill their 30% role, things will inevitably go off the rails. The child's 40% effort simply won't be enough to cross the finish line, no matter how hard they try.
So if a child fails, the author challenges parents to really look inward. Did they actually fulfill their 30%, or did they just blindly push for better grades because providing pocket money and a warm meal, that is not the same as actively building a foundation of wisdom and direction? The source insists that basic material needs absolutely do not satisfy the required parental role in this equation.
That takes us to Section 3, the true role of educated parents, the debt of the elite. Now we should focus to see exactly what that 30% parental responsibility actually looks like, specifically for highly educated parents of the current generation.
We really have to remember the stark historical context the text presents here. It points out that elite education for the current 50-something generation was only made possible through the immense, grinding sacrifices of the broader, struggling post-WW2 public. Going to a top university wasn't just some personal achievement, it was a societal investment. The public sacrificed enormously just so a select few could gain high-level knowledge. And here is where the source draws this incredibly jarring contrast. It looks at the domestic chores elite parents often obsess over versus the lofty societal duties they actually owe the world. The author poses a really harsh question. Did the public bleed and sweat just so highly educated minds could sit at home, packing lunches, washing socks, and hovering over their kids' homework? The argument here is that doing so is a massive waste of intellectual capital.
Instead, the source argues that educated parents should be out there doing high-level social work. In this paradigm, if you're an intellectual, your primary job is to serve the nation. The financial compensation you get for that high-level work would more than cover the cost of paying someone else to handle those daily chores. It makes it a much more efficient and beneficial use of everyone's time and unique skills.
But what happens when intellectuals abandon those societal duties just to enrich their own families? Well, it creates a dangerous disconnect. The text specifically calls out this modern trend of elites making money just to buy expensive yachts and escape on weekends, totally ignoring the struggling public that funded their education in the very first place. This neglect, the source warns, is inevitably going to invite a massive backlash and a profound crisis for the elite class.
Let's head into our final section, Section 4, the power of environment. You absorb what you see. We're going to see how these macro-societal duties connect directly back to a child's success, creating this almost deterministic view of how a child finds their career path.
The source proposes a completely different formula for success than what most of us are used to. It argues that it's not about how much you micromanage their study time at all. It is entirely about the caliber of people you bring into your home. The child observes, interacts, and absorbs the specific environmental energy of these guests. It's like they're a sponge soaking it all up.
Look at these highly specific examples from the text. If a professor frequently visits your house and pats your child on the head, the child absorbs that energy and naturally gravitates toward academia. If your home is constantly filled with police officers, your kid will likely lean toward law enforcement. If monks or spiritual seekers frequent your dinner table, the child will be drawn to that path. The idea is that the child is literally molded by the energy of the people crossing your threshold. The absolutely crucial takeaway from this philosophy is that just throwing money at a child won't make them great. You can buy them the most expensive backpacks or the highest-priced private lessons, but the text argues that without exposure to the living, breathing energy of people doing meaningful work in the world, well, a child simply lacks the true fuel for greatness.
So, when parents finally step up to fulfill their societal duties, they naturally attract other great minds into their home, automatically setting up their child for a life of purpose. This is the ultimate beautiful cycle the source presents. If individuals are out in the world, working passionately for the public good, they naturally befriend other socially minded leaders. Those leaders visit the home, interact with the child, and then the child effortlessly grows up to serve the nation. It all just clicks into place.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought from the text to chew on. Is your parenting truly building a foundation for society, or are you just satisfying your own ego? This philosophy argues that if families isolate themselves and focus purely on grades just to serve their own pride, they ultimately fail. It leaves us with this radical proposition that true success for a child only begins when parents start living for the world. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with us today.